welcome. It's going to be a quick video talking about Warforging gear and how it's essentially ruined PvE content in World of Warcraft in its current form. Now, this doesn't mean I'm saying take it out. I'm going to present a variant of it that I think will serve the purpose that it originally was intended to serve, and also give an easier sort of feel for play and enjoyment for players, but also allow for developers to essentially control the pace at which the raid tier is being done and give them a bit more time to properly tune things out, and people just generally get more enjoyment from the raid tier. So when I'm looking at a raid tier, the most fun I've had in this raid tier was actually doing it on normal. I was doing it on normal at a low item level without knowing the fights that well, because progression was there. We were learning fights, we were getting gear, and we were happy about it. And that's when I was playing with a bunch of my friends. So when we're looking at MMORPGs, we're looking at progression. Getting better as an individual, getting better at your character rotation, getting better gear, getting better at killing bosses, and getting better as a community to kill these bosses and eventually just like beat it all, get great, awesome. Now what Warforging does is, yes, it gives you an ability to get good pieces from repeating content, which is good to help other people get the content done, and also gives replayability. But what it does is it directly impacts current content that people are doing and puts negative spins on a whole bunch of that stuff, whether that be before the raid tier is even out, people are already outgeared normal. And then by the time people finish normal, they're already outgeared some of heroic, and then they suddenly get to a boss where the item level doesn't matter as much, and you can't brute force loads of mechanics, and you end up getting screwed and people get complacent and quit. Because that's seemingly what's happening quite a lot, or by the time they finish it, they're finally done and they're just like, screw this, I'm not doing this again. So Warforging as a way of progressing just is not good for an MMORPG. It's gambling, it's just a random luck of the draw, it's frustrating. Yeah, when you get a piece, you're like, oh yeah, Titan Forged, but I'd still prefer to get 4 upgrades over a space of a raid tier, whether that's 2 weeks or whatever, and I'm excited about getting this new upgrade. I'm like, yes, I got this new bit, it's going to give me a bit more damage, and then it's going to make this boss a little bit easier, and then maybe we can actually get that next heroic boss that we're looking to get. But also what I think having not Warforged gear makes people look at how they're playing their class and their rotation and the strategies more, which is the core of progression. Finding strategies that works for your team and making sure that you're playing your character as best as you can mechanically, like boss mechanics, but also rotation mechanics and using all of your utility. So I feel like a lot of people with Warforged systems are just looking at massive item level, massive damage, massive healing, let's go, let's not give a crap about anything else. I want people with high item levels, link me achievements, all that type of crap, which kind of detaches people from communities and makes people upset when they don't get good items, or they're not pulling the damage that they want because they're like, oh, it's just my items, you just have a higher item level than me, rather than focusing on your core gameplay mechanics of your class. So another key point when I'm looking at Warforged and how it's impacted on like WoW raid tiers and stuff like that is the skipping of learning phases for individuals on bosses. So if you go into normal, say Gahoon, take it as an example because this is the video that you're watching, when you have the grey orbs, the blood stacks, and then the gold orby things for the gates and stuff like that to do. If you do it on normal, say twice, you've practiced the mechanics, you've done a couple of wipes maybe, and you've gotten really good at getting those core mechanics of the boss done. And you understand that feasts happen and you need to manage your stacks and stuff like that because you've made it last a little bit longer. But if you're on normal and you just brute force the crap out of the whole thing, kick the door off its hinges, run through Gahoon and get the loot, you haven't seen the blood stacks and how bad that can actually be for healers. You haven't seen where you need to put grey stuff and stuff and other mechanics. Then when you get onto heroic actually really start to matter and really just cripple groups. And everyone gets complacent, nobody wants to play the goddamn game, and everyone just leaves. Or you have people wiping on heroic for 200 wipes or something like that in a group, which, yeah, it ties a community together in progression, but it also gets people angry at each other, gets people upset, like completely sick of the game. If the progression was stretched out by a week because people still needed better gear and needed to practice it a bit on normal, they'd be able to get a much more satisfying progression done rather than being annoyed and then when it's over, it's finally over and I don't want to play this game ever again. I'm going to go play something else until the next raid tier comes out. And with the whole skipping of learning phases, you also have a lot of people who end up getting put massively out of their depth. So you have somebody who maybe normally raids LFR, normally does normal, would take them a bit of time, and then gets a couple of heroic bosses done. And they're really excited about those heroic bosses. Instead, they're like, I need to do heroic and then I need to do mythic because I need better gear. And they're just looking at better gear constantly. And they're not looking at mechanics because all the groups that they're in has loads of people with really high item level because they've got a couple of mythic raiders who are in there as well because they're trying to get a Warforged piece of gear, a Titanforged piece of gear from like a normal or a heroic run, and then they just don't pay attention to mechanics. And they don't know why everything's taking so long and everything's ballsing up, and people in the group who are doing everything properly and know why they're doing stuff properly because they've been playing loads more get frustrated at that individual, get frustrated at the raid leader because the raid leader is not kicking them, and there's this build-up of frustration that makes people not want to play. And by skipping these learning phases and putting people out of their depth, you're generally just making people not enjoy the game that much and making people really focused on getting pieces of gear that are Warforged and Titanforged. That's not necessarily the important progression that you should be looking at in an MMORPG. Yes, you want better gear, but you also want to just have growth in communities, in individual players, in their skill at playing that character, not just getting a randomly increased level of gear. Like if you get a piece of gear that you knew you could have got from a boss, you're happy about it. But if you get a piece of gear that you're not happy about because it didn't Warforge, it kind of takes away what is rooted into the fun of killing bosses. So that's a larger portion of it, and people being out of the depth is not great. And what it also does is like it doesn't only affect the players and how much they enjoy the game, it also affects the developers, because as we've seen, there's an increasing speed at which raid tiers have to be pushed out and the increasing difficulty of mechanics to equate for this siege of back doors being pushed open by pure item level HPS and DPS just like bulging past the door, breaking in and just clean sweeping the house of loot, and then players asking developers, where's the next raid tier? Where's more loot? No, you could slow it down by not giving them the tools to just run through and destroy everything, by limiting the gear that you get by it being the gear that you get from the boss. It says it in the dungeon journal, it's those pieces of gear. Like, what's so wrong with getting those pieces of gear? You don't need this Titanforge stuff. So being able to just brute force mechanics makes people complacent about, okay, there's not more gear, I have to keep running this gear, this raid to get this Titanforge piece of gear so I can get the best of the logs, rather than working as a community and working together to improve mechanically and improve gear wise. So having said all of this, I don't think Warforging can be taken out of the game, or necessarily should, because not getting a piece of gear because you're unlucky, and then just not getting any piece of gear and being super frustrated because you can't get better pieces of gear and you can't do better content because you can't get gear, it's incredibly frustrating. I've had it happen to me. So what I say is bring in what I'd call the Titanforge. So you get a piece of gear from a boss, say Gahoon, and then you get an internal quest within that item. that if you beat that boss 3 times on either that difficulty or the difficulties above it, you can Warforge that piece by increasing its item level by 5, and then again by 5, or however many times you want to be able to make it do it, or get a socket on there eventually, or something along those lines. However it wants to be done, I don't mind. But what it would allow you to do is, you can then go, okay, my item is actually being forged in the war against this boss, increasing it as I do the boss more. And then once you get that heroic piece, if you already have a Titan Forged piece, you can then improve that heroic piece. So this heroic piece is not just null and void, like, oh, I don't give a shit about it because it's not as good as this other one. No, you can then increase that one. And it gives you this more linear progression that can actually occur in the game, and people can be happy about, because they're getting better gear and they're working towards it and they can see it happening, and they're going to replay the content anyway because they're like, oh, if I go back and I do that content, then I can Warforge this to this piece and whatever. So they can actually increase their gear, feel good about it, and then the developers can know, okay, this is the maximum item level and the maximum DPS that these guys can actually do for this boss fight. So you can set DPS checks on bosses. It stops you having to make stupidly hard mechanics that are incredibly broken for no reason whatsoever, as you just being like, this just needs to be ridiculously hard, and it's hard to balance because we don't know if people are going to be Warforged or whatever. So having said all that, and this background video is going a bit buggy, I think Warforging is something that could stay in the game in that form, and I think in its current state, it's not something that's actually good for raiding or good for PvE content generally. So I hope I got my points across fairly succinctly and properly, and whatever, however you want to say it. Leave a comment if you think the Titan Forge is a good idea, if you have any other ideas about it, what you liked about the video, what you didn't like about the video. I have a couple of other ideas of stuff to kind of commentate on and bring in some videos, so I'll try and get another one out next week, and then maybe another one that same week if these are being received well. I appreciate you listening and watching. Thanks very much. Bye.